So we're sitting here in Phil Manning's living room, lounge room. What's the official title for the room, Phil? Has it got one?
The front room.
The front room. It's called the front. But so we're in the front room, and I have to say, the front room. This look. You know how sometimes in houses you'll see rooms that look pristine or almost show homey or whatever, and other ones you said that look lived in and loved in. This is a lived in, loved in room. I get the impression this would be one of your favourite rooms in the house. It's got a lovely feel to it in here, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, Philippa, my wife, and I we're very busy all the time she's an artist and I'm a musician, so we're always working, doing things, so the rest of the property is cluttered as anything. There's art and leads and guitars, all that sort of stuff everywhere. So this is the room that manages to avoid most of that.
Yeah.
And
I'm interested. So you mentioned that Philippa is an artist, and obviously you're a musician, as we know. Often, creative people have certain characteristics about how they work and how they like to work. Having two creative people together could be a bit oil and water, or it could be fantastic. Do you find that partnership works really well in terms of the creative process?
Yeah, well, I sort of tend to be rather untidy in my workspace. Tends to get very clogged. I'll get it really cleaned up, and then it'll get cluttered, and it just can't help it. Philippa is constantly creating new work, and obviously she prints them out, and then she'll decide that work's not good enough, so she'll print more out,
Mm-hmm.
So invariably you end up with stuff everywhere, but we sort of basically agree that we like the place clean, and we like at least this room to be reasonably tidy.
Well, it's a great room, and I can see that it's a room that stimulates creativity very, very nicely. Phil, let's go back, way back to the start. You are from Tassie.
Yep.
And I could be wrong. This could be a really unfair comment, so please correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think Tassie's renowned for its musical artist history, for people who've come out of Tassie and become... Is that an unfair statement, or is that a fair statement?
Well, I suppose it's a fair statement. I mean, there've been, obviously, there's been people like Errol Flynn came out of Tasmania.
Yes, true.
Now, I think that people like to say Tony Naylor, wonderful guitar player from Launceston, myself, a few other people, one young guy doing noticeably very well in Sydney and around the world, Darryl Beaton from my hometown. But yeah, I think its population compared to somewhere like Melbourne, there's obviously going to be a lot more musical people breaking through. And the other thing that exists is Bass Strait between. So getting from Tasmania to Melbourne to work obviously requires logistics. You can't just get in your car and drive. You have to book a ferry and drive onto the ferry. So there's little aspects like that, but I think the population probably would have the biggest impact.
Population in Tassie very small. You mentioned your hometown. What was life like when young Phil was 15, 16 years old? What was life like in your hometown growing up? What was it like for you?
Well, obviously I was at school, and starting by that stage to learn to play guitar. I played a lot of hockey. That was the main sport that I tended to be best at. And a couple of mates and myself were really interested in geology, so we'd head off way up the back blocks and go prospecting, and we had old mines department maps, and we'd go and find old mine sites and mines that had closed after the Second World War. You could go fishing off the wharves. They didn't have the infrastructure of the town all blocked off with high fences. You could wander through the railway yards. You could sit on the wharf while they were unloading ships and fish. So in it was actually a great way to grow up as a young person. I really enjoyed it.
It's interesting, you talk about, how you could, the walls were there and you could go to the wharfs and so on. I recall when I was a kid, you could go to the local rubbish dump and you could prospect around for things.
Yeah, we could do that too.
Yeah, all these things that we could do when we were younger, you can't do now. Do you think was it a better time, do you think?
Oh, look, I don't know. I can't compare my time to someone being 14 or 15 today. I'd imagine that some of the 14 and 15-year-olds today would probably say, God, what a boring life. What, you didn't have Game Boy? Come on.
The problem was there was no fences. Goodness me, what's going on there? Yeah, true. Yeah, it is a different world though. So the move from Tassie, when did you move? When did you make the move from the South Island, as they call it?
Well, that was in 1966. I left high school when I was 17 and went to art school. I only lasted at art school for about 8 months, and I really wanted to play music for a living. Well, I didn't even think about doing it for a living. I just wanted to do it. It's just. And one of the big singing stars from the 60s was playing in Hobart. His name was Tony Worsley, and I read where he'd lost his guitar player to the Bee Gees. Vince Maloney had gone to join the Bee Gees, and so I went backstage and met him and said I'd like to apply for the job, and I played a bit of guitar for him, and 2 days later I was in Melbourne rehearsing with the Blue Jays, which was the name of his band.
So hang on, so you went to see the show as a fan? And
No, I went to see the show because I knew that Tony was looking for a guitar player.
Yeah, but did you? So when you went to see the show, did you go there and set up with him first, or did you go and buy a ticket and then kind of sneak your way around to see him later on?
Oh no, I knew the doorman, and because I was playing there locally.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay.
And so I just went straight backstage and met him before the show and had a chat. Then when he'd done his show, we sat around in the dressing room, and I borrowed a guy's guitar and played for him for a while.
Geez, right place, right time, huh? Yeah. It's probably a bit of a sliding doors moment, that one, isn't it? Really, it's if that hadn't happened, you might have been a geologist to this day.
Well, look, anything could happen, really, and in that regard, I think I've been incredibly fortunate right throughout my whole musical career. In that I've had little things that have happened like that the whole way through. And you can look back at them and say, well, if that hadn't happened, maybe I would have had to have become a truck driver or something. Yeah.
So as much as a pivotal moment as that was, do you look back through your career and is there one particular moment you can say, geez, you know what, there, but for the grace of God, that I'm so fortunate that one thing happened, that one thing there, that really did make a
Well, I'll tell you, this is probably, if you could have a pivotal moment, it's probably when Matt Taylor joined Chain. We went for our first rehearsal, and I played. And Matt said, "What's that?" I said, "Oh, it's a little riff I'm working on." And Matt said, "Great, I want to do a work song, and that's a perfect rhythm for it." And so, as a result of that, we wrote Black and Blue, and we had, of course, in here in Australia, had a big #1 with it, especially in Victoria, and that set the stage for our career. Now, Chain were already a fairly well-known band by the late 60s, or by 1970 when Matt joined, and we'd done the club circuit and residencies and played all over the place and had a really good name as a band. But when we had Black and Blue as a hit, it just put the whole thing onto a different level. And I can sort of always look at that funny little simple riff and go, goodness gracious, that was a bit of good fortune. Yeah.
You do often hear people say, geez, I loved Band X or Band Y before they were famous, before they were big. And I imagine that moment that you talked about there really was a watershed moment in terms of going from that group of core fans who loved what you did to all of a sudden welcoming in this entire new fan base, clearly, who would have taken, you know, obviously kicked it to another level again.
Yeah, well, that definitely was the case. And of course, the other thing that happened at that time was that when Matt joined the band, we didn't have a manager. The previous chain had Warren Morgan had gone to join the Aztecs, Glyn Mason had gone to England, and that left Barry Sullivan, Barry Harvey, and me. And we worked for a while as a trio, and then we went up to Queensland and took some time. Well, we were still playing, doing gigs and stuff, but we took some time off. And whilst there, I wrote to Matt and said, listen, I'm sick of being the vocalist all the time. Why don't you come and join the band? And so Matt arrived, and he said, well, when we go back to Melbourne, I found this really great young guy that works for the Ambo, one of the big booking agencies here, and he'd love to manage us, and he'd be a great manager, I think, and his name's Michael Gudinski. And so we came back to Melbourne, and Michael took over our management, and next thing we were really, you know, a huge band.
Yeah.
It was quite a transformation in a short time.
It's a real shame about Michael. His career hasn't really kicked on since then, has it?
No, not really.
Phil, it'd be remiss of me not to ask you about the famous red guitar. Tell us about the origins of the famous red guitar. The famous red guitar. Is it famous red guitar?
No, I never called it the famous red guitar. This is not the famous red guitar. The red Strat I had in chain when we had Black and Blue and all that was an L series red Strat, which I sold to a guy and moved on to a Gibson at that stage. And he stripped it back to its natural finish, and apparently he then put it back to being a red guitar and sold it to Kylie Minogue, who, as a birthday present for Jason Donovan.
Oh gosh!
Now that's the story. That's the story as far as I know about it, anyway. And but no, this red guitar, this one's a 1988 model.
Okay, so I can't let this go unpassed. I need to clarify this. Is this guitar you wrote, or you played that original riff for Black and Blue on for Matt Taylor? Or
no.
That's not okay. Well, all right. I was a bit worried then that the guitar you played that riff on might have ended up in Jason Donovan's hands. That wouldn't be appropriate. That wouldn't work. But do you have a favourite guitar? Like over the years, do you look back on one and you go, yeah, I love that one. I just love everything about it.
Yeah, I've really liked most of the guitars that I've had. I'm not a person that sort of stores guitars. I really, at any stage, I only ever have 2 or 3 electrics, and this is the first year that they put out the Eric Clapton model, and I got one of the first ones that came into the country, or probably the first one that came into the country, pretty much, I think. And it's been my main, except for I've got another Strat that I use for slide, but it's been my main guitar since 1988, and I just love it. It's virtually maintenance free, and you know, because I don't play electric all that often nowadays. Most of my work's been in an acoustic field.
Yeah. You started years ago, like a long time ago, playing piano, yeah?
Yeah, I started piano when I was 6, and did about a year of preliminary, and then I did 6 grades of AMEB, and then I just played. You know, it was all, you know, Chopin, Debussy, Grieg, Beethoven, all that sort of stuff. By the time I got to my 8th year of playing piano, I got to really hate it. I was sick of the classical music. All I wanted to do was listen to the Rolling Stones and Beatles and Chuck Berry and people like that.
Mm-hmm. On a positive side, at least you could play Let's Spend the Night Together, at least the opening part. So that could work. So was that when you started to learn guitar, or started to pick up guitar, was it?
Yeah, well, I wanted to get a guitar from when I was about 14, but it took me a while to convince my dad he said, I'm just worried that if you take up guitar, your studies are going to suffer at school.
Was he right?
Yeah.
Oh, so well, he was right, but in the long run, it's worked out. It's worked out.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know. It might be the case too that you probably it's a bit sexier playing guitar, isn't it, than a piano? Wouldn't you think?
Well, of course, that was part of the whole attraction of why so many of us wanted to get into music. You know, you'd see a guy come on stage in a really nifty suit with boots and hairstyle and playing guitar, you know, and that was the look.
Yeah.
And it was funny. I was thinking before we set up here today that it is a bit surprising in a way that considering the Animals had keyboards and so many of the bands did it, it's a bit surprising that I didn't actually continue on keyboards, but I didn't.
No. Well, I think it's been more the positive for that as well. You played with so many musos over the years. So many people, some wonderful musicians and performers. Is there somebody who you've never played or never shared a stage with who you thought, gee, that person is just fantastic. I would have loved to have done something with them.
Oh, there's quite a few. There's quite a few actually when you think about it. Yeah. I toured twice with Muddy Waters around the country and got to record with a couple of guys from his band, but I never actually got to play with Muddy, and I would have loved to. He was just he was the greatest performer and greatest person. He was just wonderful.
What made him so great? I mean, you saw a different side because you toured with him. What made him so great, in your view?
He treated everyone around him really well, but he was very firm about what he wouldn't. You know, he was very straight up and down about what was okay and what was acceptable and what wasn't acceptable, and he kept his band in line. You know, like he ran his band with quite an iron fist, really. But he had just so much respect from everyone around him. And he was just a great guy, and he was very, very kind and helpful to me, and you know, it was great.
Yeah. Any other names? I mean, we won't go through the list. It's clearly a long list, as you've alluded to before. But any other one come to mind who you would have loved to have played with on stage?
Oh yeah, there's just heaps of them. I mean, I would have loved to have played with Keith Richards on stage. Because Chain supported the Stones at Kooyong Stadium one day here, and after the show, Barry Sullivan and Barry Harvey vanished, and I couldn't find them anywhere. And eventually they turned up. I said, "Where have you guys been?" They said, "Oh, I've been out the back snorting coke with Keith." I missed out on that one too.
Oh gosh, geez, he's still going strong, isn't he, Keith Richards? I tell you what, he's lucky to have survived 2016 the way he looks.
Yeah, I think every time a guitar player dies, God gives Keith Richards his energy.
Yeah. It's I wouldn't be surprised. Phil, it's one of the things that's interesting about a guy like you. You are absolutely in the minority here in that the people who can make a career out of music. Well, you know, we see people who, you know, we hear people on the radio, we see them playing live in venues, just as we do with you and your music. But the artists who can make a living out of what you do are very small, and you managed to do it for a very, very long time, very, very successfully, which is both a credit to you and absolutely part of the minority as well. For bands starting out today, it seems to be a lot tougher than when you started. And I don't say that to suggest that you had an easy road. You certainly, I'm not saying you did that at all. But for bands and musicians starting out today, it's a very, very different world, isn't it? Do you think the odds are against them these days, or do you think it can still work well?
Well, you're constantly seeing new acts coming through that are doing well. For instance, there are acts that are coming through nowadays, young acts, who put together a video clip, put it out in the world, and the next thing they're playing at a bunch of festivals in Germany. That does happen. Back in the 60s and early 70s, I suppose the biggest difference between now and then in Australia and probably in many parts of the world is that there was a much bigger sort of live scene, and there were certainly more, like I remember back in the 60s, there was a venue on every corner. Back in the mid-60s when I first started playing professionally, it was nothing to do an afternoon gig on a Saturday, then do an early evening spot, and then end up at a late spot at 3 and sometimes 4 different venues in the one day. And in that regard, it was much easier than today. But still, to sort of succeed back then, you had to be prepared to be on the road all the time. And we were on the road all the time. It was basically until some of us got married and started having children, and we sort of had to rein ourselves in a wee bit and put a bit more time, energy into families and whatever. It was basically a year-long tour, and as soon as New Year's Eve was over, you started the next one, the next year's tour.
Do you think that time on the road brings out the kind of the songwriting that you've done? And I say this about your music, and also Matt's too for that matter, and both of you have written songs about personal experiences, or seems to be personal experiences, and about places you've been, and you've both done that. Is that kind of how you naturally write, or is that a legacy of being on the road so long for so many years?
I think it's probably an accident, if anything. And I'll tell you why I make that statement, is that for a long time I toyed with the idea of including Australian place names in songs where it might be about travelling or blah blah blah. And there was something that was embarrassing about the idea, because somehow the words didn't seem to have the allure of Mississippi or Clarksdale, or the names of songs that you heard in blues music all the time. But then there came a sort of time in my life anyway, particularly I'd say probably late 70s, early 80s, I started to see a lot more beauty in a lot of Australian place names, particularly a lot of Aboriginal names. So, like on Water on the Road, which is one of my songs from my Two Roads CD, there's a line in it, the bridge is out at Waterford, Wonga Wallen, Coomera too. And so Wonga Wallen and Coomera are both Aboriginal names. And when you think about it, Australia's just full of beautiful sounding names. Wangaratta, that's Mulwala. They're actually quite poetic and quite sort of soft.
It's almost a uniquely, I don't know if it's unique, but it's a particularly Australian thing, that I guess that kind of cultural cringe you talk about early on, which that's not, you're not the first artist who would say that. What's interesting about that is a lot of New Zealand bands or New Zealand artists went exactly the other way, and they would very proudly sing about the New Zealand places, which is really, really interesting. I don't know why. Maybe it's a little bit different there.
Well, I think one of the big differences with New Zealand and Australia is that New Zealand, the Pakeha and the Maori had a treaty.
Yeah.
Maybe the Pakeha didn't live up to his end of it very well, but nevertheless they actually had a treaty and kept a balance of what's the word I'm looking for? Kept a balance of pride between themselves. Whereas in Australia, God, we basically committed close to it full genocide and never acknowledged them, never just took their land, and there's never been a proper treaty or anything. So, yeah, I can understand why the New Zealanders have a bit more going in that regard.
No question. The way that Pākehā have treated the Maori and back then and to this day is significantly more respectful than how we treated Aboriginal cultures.
Definitely.
You enjoy your time in New Zealand? I know you recorded a live show there. Did you enjoy New Zealand?
Yeah. Well, I've probably toured New Zealand 14, 15 times, particularly back in the late 70s. I was always going over, late 70s, early 80s, I was going over there quite often. Once again, same as in Australia, there's just not the live venues that there used to be. And so putting together a proper tour is quite a difficult thing.
Yeah, it's the new world, isn't it, with the live venues sort of maybe being removed around the country, around this part of the world anyway.
Yeah, well, the last time I played New Zealand was as support for the Doobie Brothers. We went over for 2 shows, one in Christchurch and one in Taranaki.
So we've talked Muddy Waters, supporting Muddy Waters, or playing with Muddy Waters, talked Doobie Brothers, playing with Doobie Brothers. Have you ever played with a band, and I won't ask you to say the name of the band, have you ever played with a big name artist who was just appalling? Who you thought, you know what, you guys, you're phoning it in, or you're just not, you know, have you ever had that experience, or have your experience has been largely very positive with those stars?
Yeah, I had the fortune of playing on stage with champion Jack Dupree, and he was just great. And I did a tour with him, and then I did quite a lot of shows with Bo Diddley, and Bo was just mighty. We had a 10-minute rehearsal with him in Perth when we first met, and I mean literally we ran through 2 things, and he basically said, well, see you on stage tonight. And we played for an hour and a half, nearly 2 hours I think it was, and it was just mighty. So
basically just following the lead and going where the show took you?
Yeah, well he made it really simple and really clear. He said, if I've got my capo on, we'll be in G, and he said, if I haven't got my capo on, we'll be in E. And you know, he had his Bo Diddley beat thing, and so I joined in with him. He said, stop. He said, I'm playing that. You play whatever you want to. And, so it was actually great because you know, we weren't tied down to very restrictive stuff. It was we had a ball with him.
Yeah, isn't it the essence of a great show? You just have fun with
it. Yeah, very much.
Phil Manning, it's been great to talk to you in the front room. Thank you for having us in your home. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan.